The missiles are falling thousands of miles away. The headlines are talking about Iran, the United States, oil, military strikes, foreign policy, things that sound very far removed from everyday life. But here's the uncomfortable truth. A conflict on the other side of the world can quietly affect the price of your groceries, your gas tank, your retirement account, your next vacation, your mortgage, and even your job. In fact, some people will feel the effects before they even fully understand what's happening. And that's exactly why I wanted to make this video. Because global events don't stay global for very long. Eventually, they show up in your wallet. Let's talk about how. Before we begin, one important point. This video isn't about politics. It isn't about choosing sides. It isn't about predicting military outcomes. It's about understanding how major geopolitical events can affect ordinary people financially. Because whether we like it or not, money and global events are deeply connected. And when tensions rise, markets react, businesses react, consumers react, sometimes all at once. Problem 1. Gas prices. Let's start with the thing most people notice first, gasoline. Because oil is basically the blood supply of the global economy, and the Middle East sits on a huge portion of the world's oil production. Whenever military conflict threatens oil supply routes, investors immediately become nervous. And nervous investors tend to bid oil prices higher. Now imagine this. You currently pay $3.50 per gallon. You fill up a 15-gallon tank. That's about $52. If oil spikes and gasoline rises to $4.50 per gallon, that same tank now costs almost $68. That's an extra $16 every fill-up. Maybe you fill up twice a week. That's over $125 extra every month. Over a year, more than $1,500, and that's just one car. Now imagine a household with 2 vehicles. Suddenly the war isn't overseas anymore. It's sitting in your driveway. Problem 2, grocery prices. Here's something many people miss. Food travels. A lot. Farmers use diesel, trucks use diesel, ships use fuel, factories use fuel, warehouses use fuel. When energy gets more expensive, almost everything becomes more expensive. Let's say transporting food costs a company 10% more. That increase rarely stays with the company. Eventually it reaches consumers, meaning you. A family spending $1,000 monthly on groceries might suddenly spend $1,080. That doesn't sound terrible until you realize that's nearly $1,000 extra every year for the exact same groceries. No extra food, no extra quality, just higher costs. And most families won't even notice it happening immediately. Prices simply creep higher 1 week at a time. Problem 3, inflation returns. This is where things become dangerous, because higher energy costs don't just affect gas and groceries, they affect everything. Delivery services, manufacturing, airlines, retail stores, construction. Businesses start paying more, then consumers start paying more. Economists call this inflation. Most people call it, why is everything suddenly more expensive? Let's say inflation rises from 2% to 5%. A $100 grocery trip becomes $105. A $1,500 rent payment eventually becomes $1,575. A $40 dinner becomes $42. One expense isn't devastating. Hundreds of expenses are. That's why inflation feels sneaky. It doesn't hit you once. It hits you repeatedly, every day. Problem 4. Your investments may get hit. Whenever uncertainty increases, markets usually dislike it. Imagine you're running a business. You don't know whether oil prices will rise. You don't know whether shipping routes will stay open. You don't know whether governments will impose new restrictions. Would you invest aggressively? Probably not. Investors think similarly. That's why markets often become volatile during geopolitical conflicts. Let's imagine you open your retirement account. Last week it showed $100,000. This week it shows $92,000. Nothing changed in your life. But suddenly $8,000 appears to have disappeared. That's emotionally difficult, especially for people nearing retirement. Now here's the important part. Temporary market declines are not unusual, but many people panic, and panic is often more expensive than the decline itself. Problem 5. Travel gets more expensive. Ever wonder why airline tickets suddenly jump in price? Fuel. Airlines consume enormous amounts of fuel. When oil rises, airline costs rise. And guess who usually pays the difference? Passengers. Let's say a family vacation costs $2,500. Airfares increase 20%. Now the trip costs $3,000. Nothing changed about the destination. Nothing changed about the hotel. You simply paid more because energy became more expensive. The same thing can happen with cruise vacations, shipping costs, international travel, even package deliveries. The world is connected through transportation, and transportation runs on energy. Problem 6. Mortgage rates could stay higher. This one surprises a lot of people. Most people assume wars affect soldiers, not homebuyers, but inflation and interest rates are connected. If inflation stays elevated, central banks often keep interest rates higher, and higher interest rates usually mean more expensive mortgages. Imagine buying a $400,000 home. At a 5% mortgage rate, your payment might be roughly $2,150. At 7%, that same house might cost over $2,650 monthly. That's a difference of around $500 every month, or $6,000 every year. Suddenly, a geopolitical conflict has influenced whether someone can afford a house. That's how interconnected modern economies are. Problem 7. Job security. This is the part people rarely think about. Businesses hate uncertainty. When companies become uncertain, they often delay hiring, expansion, new projects, investment. Sometimes layoffs follow. Imagine you're the CEO of a company. You don't know whether costs will increase. You don't know whether consumers will spend less. You don't know what the economy will look like 6 months from now. Would you aggressively hire? Probably not. Now multiply that uncertainty across thousands of companies. That's why geopolitical instability can eventually influence employment, not immediately, but gradually, and often unexpectedly. Problem 8. Fear itself. This may sound strange, but one of the biggest economic impacts isn't oil, or inflation, or markets. It's fear. Because fear changes behavior. People spend less. Businesses invest less. Consumers delay purchases. Investors panic. Employers become cautious, and economies often slow down because people become uncertain. Think back to times when you felt financially worried. Did you spend confidently? Probably not. Now imagine millions of people feeling that way simultaneously. Fear itself becomes an economic force, and sometimes it becomes more powerful than the original event. Now, why this matters. Even if nothing gets worse. Now here's something important. You don't need a worst-case scenario for these effects to happen. Markets react to uncertainty. Businesses react to uncertainty. Consumers react to uncertainty. Sometimes the fear of a problem creates effects before the problem itself arrives, which is why understanding these connections matters, because awareness allows preparation. Preparation reduces panic, and reduced panic usually leads to better decisions. What should ordinary people actually do? Notice I didn't say, buy this stock, sell that stock, move all your money, because nobody knows exactly what happens next. What you can do is focus on fundamentals, build an emergency fund, avoid unnecessary debt, maintain long-term investments, keep learning, stay informed, understand where your money goes, and remember that volatility is not the same thing as catastrophe. The more prepared you are financially, the less vulnerable you become when uncertainty arrives. One of the biggest financial mistakes people make is assuming that global events are somebody else's problem, that wars affect governments, that markets affect investors, that economics affects economists. But the reality is much simpler. Global events eventually become local events. They show up at gas stations, grocery stores, airports, housing markets, retirement accounts, and family budgets. We cannot control what happens in the world. Most of us can't influence international conflicts, but we can understand them. And understanding matters, because when prices rise, when markets fall, when uncertainty appears, you'll know why it's happening, and knowledge gives you something incredibly valuable: perspective. The goal isn't to live in fear. The goal is to stay informed, because awareness doesn't eliminate problems, but it does help you navigate them, and that's exactly what this channel is about. Understanding the systems that shape our financial lives, one lesson at a time. I'm Morgan Vals. Build small, grow strong, live free, and I'll see you in the next video.